On the line with us is Saru Jayaraman, the president of One Fair Wage, director of the Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley. Onefairwage.site is the website. The Twitter handle is Saru Jayaraman, Sarujayaraman, or at One Fair Wage. And Saru, I saw this piece, your report. The title really caught me. Take off your mask so I know how much to tip you. And, you know, it kind of makes us all realize that so much is lost in our communications when we can't see if another person is smiling or frowning or whatever. But this really goes way beyond all that. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It really honestly goes to the ways in which the pandemic has exposed pre-existing conditions in our economy, in our society, and unfortunately pre-existing conditions in the restaurant industry, because prior to the pandemic, the restaurant industry already had the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry, largely due to the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, which is a legacy of slavery. 43 states allow restaurants to pay their workers a sub-minimum wage and forcing them to live entirely on tips or mostly on tips. That's a direct legacy of slavery. It's also been a source of sexual harassment for a mostly female industry because it forces women servers to put up with whatever a customer might do to them, however they touch them or treat them or talk to them, because the customer's always right and pays their bills, not their employer. 7 states have done it differently, including California and Oregon and Washington and many other states. They require full minimum wage with tips on top and have 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment, because there, women can rely on a wage from their boss and they're not as reliant on the tips. Well, all of that became much worse during the pandemic. And what the report shows, unfortunately, based on 2,000 surveys of workers who've been gone back to work during the pandemic, is that not only have health risks really just become horrific, most of the workers report that they cannot enforce social distancing and mask rules on the very same customers from whom they have to get tips, because tips are way down. They report tips are down 50 to 75%. But also 40% of workers are reporting that sexual harassment has gone way up. And hundreds of women submitted comments from male customers saying along the lines of, take off your mask so I can judge how cute you are and therefore determine your tips, which means that the issue of the sub-minimum wage has gone from an issue of race and gender and economic injustice to become literally a matter of life and death, because if these women are being asked to remove their protective gear for the chance to get a tip so that a male customer can judge their looks and therefore their tip on that basis, it's truly life-threatening.
It also highlights a reality that has been documented many, many times, in the past few decades, that attractiveness, however society defines that, is one of the things that's a huge variable in tips, which should tell us all that tipping is not just supporting whatever you would call that. I think this goes way beyond sexism. It's and misogyny. It's some sort of fundamental flaw at the core of our society. But not only is that real, but it should call for a complete reformation in the way we do this. I lived in Europe for a year. You tip in Europe, but basically your tip is, whatever's the leftover change is. You have a $20 meal and you give, or a $19.60 meal and you give them a $20 euro bill, and they give you back, 41 pennies, basically. You just leave that on the table. It's just the leftover, because everybody has a decent wage. The tipping is just kind of an incidental thing. Whereas here it's like, wow, 10%, 15%, 20%. Why? Because that's how they get paid. But it's at your discretion. And is she cute? I mean, this is nuts.
It's nuts. It's nuts. It's outrageous. It's a reflection of all the biases in our society. And it's a reflection of history. It's so important to know the history, because what you experienced in Europe is not an accident. Tipping originated in feudal Europe. It was something that aristocrats and nobles gave to serfs and vassals, but always on top of a wage. When that idea came to the states, it came right before emancipation. And at emancipation, restaurant owners wanted to hire newly freed slaves and not pay them anything and have them live entirely on tips, which was a mutation of the concept of tipping. Tipping was intended, exactly as you said, as just an extra or a bonus. but it became a replacement for wages because of slavery in the United States. And that became law in 1938 as part of the New Deal when everybody got the right to the minimum wage. But tipped workers who were mostly black were left out and told you get a $0 wage as long as tips bring you to the full minimum wage. So we went from zero in 1938 all the way to $2.13 an hour, which is the absurd and ridiculous minimum wage for tipped workers in the United States of America in 2020. And today you've got it's the nation's second largest workforce. This is not a tiny workforce of people living on this sub-minimum wage. This is almost 14 million workers. And during the pandemic, that absurd and ridiculous sub-minimum wage has wreaked complete havoc. 60% of these workers couldn't get unemployment insurance because most states told them that their wages were too low to meet the minimum threshold to qualify for benefits. And after months of not getting benefits, they go back to work, and they're going back to work for a sub-minimum wage, and tips are way down. And so they're being asked to do a lot more for way less. Less tips, more responsibility, more harassment, more hostility. And you're right. This report, this research obliterates the idea that tipping was ever correlated with the quality of the service. So you're right. There's years of data, reams of data that show that, in fact, tipping is directly correlated with all American biases, the race of the server, the gender of the server, whether she'll touch you or not or allow herself to be touched. We already knew these things, but this data proves, I mean, if it were truly based on the quality of her service, why would you need her to pull down her mask and therefore expose herself to the virus and see her face in order to tip her? It really is a system, as you said, that needs to go. And instead, we need to pay these workers a full minimum wage and let tips be on top as an extra, as they were always intended to be.
Yeah, this also highlights another absurdity and structural inequity in our whole tipping system in the United States. I had dinner with the prince of a small country in Europe in a really fancy restaurant in Holland, in Amsterdam a few years back. And when he paid for dinner, he left it was like a $400 dinner. He left a tip of about $2, and which was not unusual, right? I mean, it was just kind of in that context. Here in the United States, if you're lucky enough to get a job in a restaurant where your average check is $100 or $200, and there are such restaurants in every town, and you're paid 10% or 20% of the tip, you make a lot of money. On the other hand, if you're working at a restaurant that serves average working class people, where the check might be $12 or $16, you're making squat. And everybody should simply make a wage as a server. The wage can have a sliding scale associated with it, but there needs to be a bottom, that is the minimum wage at the very least. Obviously, the minimum wage needs to go up to $15 an hour, but this is another piece of it too.
That's right. I mean, listen, I think servers who are listening would tell you $15 is not enough to live on anywhere in this country right now, and we need tips on top of that unless we're getting to a point where we're talking about much higher wages. But absolutely, workers need a base wage that they can count on, and tips should not be part of that base wage. They should be on top of that base wage. And believe it or not, a lot of even restaurant owners during the pandemic have come around to this idea. They've expressed new support. We just need legislators to listen and follow.
Well, we need to reestablish our cultural norms, like they have in Europe, and in order to make this happen, this is a big job. Saru Jayaraman, president of One Fair Wage, onefairwage.site is the website.